First off, thank you, Senator. I really appreciate the time.
You bet.
Could we just start? Could you state your name and occupation?
Yeah, so my name is Melissa Agard, and I am proud to be the state senator for the 16th district here in the great state of Wisconsin.
Okay. And could you summarize your involvement with the legalization movement in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so I don't know how long you want me to go into this, but ultimately I think this question could be an hours long answer. But ultimately, over a decade ago, I decided that it was really clear that the most dangerous thing about weed in Wisconsin is that it's illegal. And I started working on a full legalization bill, taxing and regulating cannabis in Wisconsin in the same way that we tax and regulate alcohol, and having a medicinal component attached to that piece of legislation. So I've been carrying that bill in the legislature for over a decade now, because I know that Wisconsin will actually be more safe, we'll have more prosperity, and everyone will have more equity if we do legalize cannabis here in the state of Wisconsin.
Okay. Can you elaborate a little bit on what, would make the state safer, kind of bring more equity? What are some of the positives that would come from a legalization bill like yours passing?
Yeah. So, when I first started working on this piece of legislation, there were only 2 states that had legalized recreationally. Wow. And here we are 10 years later, and there are 24 states that have legalized recreationally. Over half of the people in our nation live in legalized states, and certainly here in the Midwest, Wisconsin is literally an island of prohibition, with Minnesota recently joining Michigan and Illinois with full legalization, and Iowa. Even Iowa has more on the books to protect people when it comes to medicinal access of cannabis. It's not working here in the state. Whether we're talking about the egregious racial disparities when it comes to cannabis-related offenses, or whether we're talking about the importance of investing in and supporting our agricultural communities and heritage here in the state of Wisconsin, Main Street businesses and entrepreneurs who want to set up shop and actually create good-paying jobs here in the state of Wisconsin. The ability to have the economic stimulus that comes along with legalization. And I think icing on the cake is the fact that we would actually be able to make money for the state of Wisconsin, that we could reinvest in our communities. People talk about needing more mental health support, being able to address addiction, money for our public schools, or even our roads that people are driving on. We're missing out on that. Those tax dollars that currently are going either to legal states where people are taking their hard-earned dollars and investing them into the taxes of those states, or the illicit market, which is also very successful here in the state of Wisconsin, and people that don't realize that their heads are in the clouds a little bit. Awesome.
And kind of to that point of the money going in other directions too. I don't know how much you know about just kind of like through the farm bill, a lot of hemp-derived Delta-9 that is here. I mean, there are places just a couple blocks away where you can go buy kind of a plethora of different, THC products that are legal Delta-9 through this hemp extract. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that out in the market today?
Yeah, so, this last year, in 2023, I embarked on what I call the grassroots tour across the state of Wisconsin and visited dozens of businesses and communities and talked with law enforcement officers, local elected officials, community members about what they are worried about with legalization and what they're excited about when it comes to legalization. And all across the state of Wisconsin, as you've pointed out, there are dispensaries that people are selling hemp-based derivative products because of the federal farm bill. But I would say, without exception, every business owner that I talked to said, please regulate us more, provide some protections for us, make sure that our consumers know when they come to our store that what they're getting is a product that is safe for them. And that there are parameters associated with how it's being distributed here in the state of Wisconsin. They are worried about their business and they're worried about their consumers. And when you literally have businesses that are out there saying, regulate us more, I think it's important for government to hear them. It is also clear that there are products available to folks in Wisconsin that shouldn't be for sale, but are for sale because of the Farm Bill. And we need to make sure that we're providing safety and protection for everyone in the state of Wisconsin, including our business owners, as well as the consumers.
Okay. And you talked to the benefits that legalization would bring, especially kind of socioeconomically. I want to talk about the current legislation. What are some of the issues or detriments of the laws we have statewide in place now?
Prohibition doesn't work. Prohibition did not work with alcohol. And are you aware that there was a point in time when margarine was prohibited in the state of Wisconsin?
Is it not still prohibited?
It isn't still.
Okay.
But there was a period in time when it was. And people literally walked around in their neighborhoods and said, hey, I'm going over the border and I'm going to be picking up some oleo. Can I bring some back for you? Does that sound familiar to you at all? We, being a prohibitionist state, does not move us forward. It is taxing to our law enforcement officers and our criminal justice system. It's not good for our Main Street businesses. And consumers who may be driving to other states to purchase products, if they're driving back to Wisconsin, they could put themselves in the line for a potential felony. We know also that it is not helping us alleviate the illicit market that currently exists in the state of Wisconsin either. So ultimately, being a prohibitionist state actually makes us less safe.
Very interesting. I want to talk a little bit also about farmers, because I know that's something you kind of mentioned. What do farmers across the state feel about legalization?
So I've talked to a number of farmers, actually most recently at the time that I introduced the bill in the fall of 2023. I did it in a hemp field here in Dane County. So I had a lovely and robust conversation with that family and have met with other farmers across the state of Wisconsin as well. Farmers are looking for opportunities to diversify their crops. And certainly growing cannabis is different than growing corn and beans, which many of the farms here in Wisconsin are growing. But there is an opportunity for farmers to be self-sufficient. There is the opportunity for them to take part of their property and turn it into hemp fields. And there was a farmer that I met a handful of years ago that actually installed an indoor grow operation when hemp was first legalized to grow in the state of Wisconsin, with the hope that a cannabis, high octane is what I call it, THC cannabis, was legalized. And he wanted to get into that business. But unfortunately, we haven't done that yet. So farmers are excited. They want this opportunity. But the lack of action by the state legislature is preventing them from being able to dive fully in.
Okay. Would you say that the majority of farmers you've spoken with kind of support this as a cash crop?
The farmers that I have spoken to, I can't tell you the majority of farmers in Wisconsin, but I can tell you from my conversations, yes, they are looking at this as an opportunity to not only diversify, but to make more money and keep their families self-sufficient and continue to keep their farms and their families.
Okay, that's great. What do you think about kind of the differences in public opinion towards legalization kind of throughout the state? Like, are there substantial arguments towards prohibition?
Well, you're asking the wrong person.
And
I believe, and I believe this because I've listened to the people of Wisconsin. Nearly 7 out of 10 folks in the state of Wisconsin, regardless of who it is that they're voting for at the top of the ticket, want us to legalize weed in Wisconsin and regulate it for responsible adult usage in the same way we do alcohol. When you're between that 60 and 70% approval rating as a politician, you consider yourself very much supported. Why is it that we're not transferring that to a policy issue such as cannabis is confusing to me. So I cannot answer the question as to why it is that we're held up on this. What I know is that the good people of the state of Wisconsin, are ahead of most of my colleagues in this building and wanting this to get done. It's only political in the walls of this building.
Interesting. And are the blockers kind of contained to this building? You know, who are...
Well, I mean, nothing's always contained, right? I mean, When I say 70% of the people, that means that, you know, there's a reasonable number of people on the outside of the building that believe that cannabis shouldn't be legalized for responsible adult usage. Some of those people believe that we should only have medicinal. Some of those people want us to decriminalize. I would say it's less than 10% of the people in Wisconsin that are prohibitionists.
Interesting. Okay. And kind of speaking on medical, do you have any thoughts about the current medical marijuana bill that is sponsored by the GOP currently?
That bill's dead.
Okay.
It's been killed by the GOP in the Senate. The GOP in the Senate and the GOP in the Assembly are not communicating with each other. Good legislation means bringing people together to a table that have diverse opinions and a commitment to cross the finish line. And the Republicans in the Assembly did not do that with their proposal. It was smoke and mirrors. It's a political stunt knowing it's an election year.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about how kind of the conversations of legalization and then legislation around alcohol and things like OWIs kind of compare. What are your thoughts on to what I feel are pretty loose laws around punitive actions with things like drinking and driving versus in some parts of the state, very punitive actions on second offense of possession of cannabis?
Well, I think that everyone who is on the roads should be able to be safe. And the way it is that we test people for cannabis is not testing impaired driving. A blood test can tell whether or not you've used cannabis over roughly the last 28 days. That doesn't mean that you're impaired at this point in time. And that's why it is that there's provisions in my bill to actually provide training and resources to law enforcement officers on testing for impairment as opposed to testing for usage. And I do agree in the state of Wisconsin that we are too lax on drunk driving. Alcohol is a big part of our culture, but it does not mean that it needs to be part of our driving culture.
Gotcha. And how do you want kind of the average person in Wisconsin to view cannabis in relation to things like nicotine or alcohol? Is one better than the other per se?
It's not my job to decide if one is better than the other, right? People have liberty, but we do know that on bottles of alcohol and on packs of cigarettes, there's warnings about usage. In the legislation that I have drafted, there are also warnings about cannabis usage. Last I checked, there weren't people that died from using cannabis, but there have been people who have died from smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol. I'm not saying it's without, harm. People need to be educated, but I haven't been able to find examples of death. Have you?
Never. No, I haven't. And it's worth mentioning, especially while the whole country fights kind of an opioid epidemic.
That's right.
And it's something that we feel kind of here in the state. And, at least with the medical bill that you said was kind of shut down, they kind of claimed that this was an approach to kind of curb this, even though the qualifications to even get anything through that medical bill proposed were very extreme situations, where I would even argue if you're dealing with things like MS, chronic pain, or you're kind of maybe not having many days left, those are the few instances where I feel being prescribed an opioid is actually worthwhile. So to me, the bill felt kind of arbitrary in a sense. And I guess where I'm kind of going with this is, where do you think both parties kind of stand on these bills that are active right now? Do you see anything passing or anything coming through these recent conversations?
This legislative session is on the downward slide. There's only a few more days in the Capitol building where the full Senate and the full Assembly will taking up legislation. And we haven't had public hearings on any of these bills. So unfortunately, I don't think we're going to cross the finish line this time, but it's clear to me that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when cannabis is legalized in Wisconsin. The genie's out of the bottle across the nation, and people in Wisconsin want it done. So one of my hopes with more fair maps and redistricting here in the state is that the will of the people will become the law of the land sooner than later.
Okay, it's very interesting. And, I think I have time for about one more question for you.
Sure.
Is there kind of anything else you want to add on, what the road to legalization looks like going forward, or just kind of legalization in general in 2024? What can the people do? What can they expect? Do you have any final words on this?
Yeah, so I know the most dangerous thing about cannabis in Wisconsin is that it remains illegal. And really, it is the job of the legislature to lift up the voices and the values of the people of the state. It's actually inscribed on the governor's conference room ceiling. The will of the people is the law of the land, or shall be the law of the land. So ultimately, there continues to be misinformation and stigma out there around cannabis policy. Certainly a lot less now than there was 10 years ago. When I first introduced this bill, people would talk to me behind their hand about that thing that I work on. And now, like when I'm picking my kids up from school, in front of children, people will say, when are we going to legalize pot in Wisconsin? So the dynamic has changed. But we still need to help destigmify this conversation. We need to educate people. Clearly, the DARE program has not been helpful when it comes to these conversations on the building. But again, I know that the tides have turned, and it's only a matter of when this policy becomes legal.
Okay.
But I also encourage people to really pay attention to the details with all lawmaking. As you've pointed out, there was a bill that came out. Many people were excited about it because the Republicans were finally putting their name behind something, but you start reading into the details, and there's a number of poison pills.
Okay,
Don't be fooled by the smoke and mirrors, right?
Okay, yes, and I think that's good to say because I looked into it and, on face value, I had the same exact reaction. Oh, this is crazy, and then you read into it and realize smoke and mirrors, like you said.
Yep.
Last really quick thing before I'll let you go. If you were to address the person from a small town or smaller community that grew up thinking that weed was a gateway drug, or maybe they're not familiar with it and it seems like a dangerous, daunting thing, how would you kind of tell them that maybe it's not what it seems?
Yeah, I think it's important we do our research and we look at what's happening in other states. The ground has not opened up and swallowed communities. Communities are actually able to be healthier, they're more robust, they have resources, social racial disparities aren't as bad. We know that Wisconsin can have that also. And, for me, it's not a matter of attacking people for different opinions. It's a matter of figuring out where people are at, why it is that they have those thoughts, and being able to have a thoughtful conversation back and forth. It's really education and relationships and building trust. That's how we get this done.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I think that's about everything I have, and it looks like that's about our time as well.
Great.
So
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good job.
Yeah,
I think you got what you needed there, and
it's our job to go quick if we have to. So I appreciate you, letting us squeeze some time in here, and that was all great stuff.